Okay, we're here in After Effects, and I've got 3 projects from 3 different students, and I just want to kind of talk about a few things in them and show a couple of ways that I think they could be improved, okay? This does not by any means mean that these students did a bad job. Everybody did an excellent job, and there's great animation to be found in all of these projects, I assure you. Just a couple like small little common errors occurred, and those are very easy to make. So I just want to kind of go over them because it's very easy for anybody to make these kind of errors, okay? So in this first one, I think if you're looking at it right now on the screen, you might notice the first little error, which is that it looks like the background layer got shifted. So you can see that there's like this little black bar right up here, and this is a really common mistake, and it's very easy to make if you don't have that layer locked. So what I would definitely recommend is for any layer like this dark gray solid here, that is this layer, just lock it, because it's not something that you ever need to animate, and it's very easy to click on this by accident thinking you're clicking on something else. See, I just thought I was clicking on setting the work area, but I actually grabbed this. And then if you accidentally hit like your arrow keys or shift and arrow, you can move it really easily without realizing that you're doing that, okay? So this happens to me all the time and to lots of people. Here's a cool thing that's a little bit advanced about how to put this back. I don't think we talked about this at all. I'm going to press P. Now, this is a solid and it's full screen, and the anchor point is in the center. So we can line this up really easily without having to kind of get in here and guess and see, and turn on the, the center thing and zoom all the way in or whatever. There's a much easier way to do that, which I will show you right now. Which involves math though, unfortunately, okay? So 1920 and 1080 are the pixels, are the size of our composition, right? And actually After Effects starts counting, so right up here in this top corner, this is 0, 0, and it goes 1920 pixels, so this pixel right over here in this corner is pixel 1920, and going down this way is pixel 1080, right? So right in the middle of the screen is 1920 divided by 2 and 1080 divided by 2, okay, which is 960 by 540. And those are really good numbers to remember, 960 by 540, because that is the very center of our comp in a 1920 by 1080 composition, right? So if I select this layer and click 960, oops, it's 960, and then click this to 540, boom. Now it's right in the center. If I turn this on, it is exactly in the center. We don't get any little, annoying gaps up top that are just a little bit noticeable, okay? So that's just one thing I want to point out right away. Go ahead, and when that's centered, again, lock it. And that's the lock button. I think I talked about that. And now that means you just can't grab that and move it to the side, okay? Great. So that's just one little thing that I noticed right away. But let's look at this animation real quick. And I think there's a couple spots where we might be able to improve this. Overall, again, I think this looks really good, and I'm very happy with this. I mean, to go from not knowing After Effects to being able to do this in a week is amazing. So definitely this is great. I did want to point out something in this scene here, okay, which is that this person kind of did a slightly different way of manipulating the position bar here. The work area, duh. And I don't think it was necessarily the best way to go. So I kind of want to point this out. And especially for whatever reason on this side, I think the person did this differently. Yeah. So what you can see here is that for this work area end, they kind of did this the right way, or the way that I was thinking would be the easiest to do it, which is just to use position animation to kind of slide this over. And this is really well done, right? But then here on this side, for whatever reason, possibly just because they were trying to experiment or whatever, they took a different tack, all right? And what they did is they dropped the anchor point down to this side, though not exactly to that bottom point here. And you can see here when I'm zoomed in this close that somehow as a result of this, the artwork shifted, and the two layers are no longer lined up, right? And you can kind of see that really clearly here. So that's one thing that didn't quite work out. And the other thing is because this person used scale for this part of the animation here, which kind of makes sense because that's how we did like the render bar and stuff. So I totally get why that person did it this way. But what happens is, look at the artwork here. Okay, I'm going to pull back a little. Look at this blue handle now. This got scaled too as part of this move, and now it looks really different from this. And one thing that I'm going to say is that you should really be aware when you're given artwork. This is, in this class, but it's certainly like if you're working in real life. If you're given artwork by your client, you really want to make sure that you preserve the way that artwork looks, because they hired somebody and that got approved, and that might have been a whole process. So even something dumb like this layer shrinking down and looking different, this could be a big issue for the designer or for an art director or somebody, because it now looks different from the approved art. So yeah, what I'm going to do here in this case is take this scale animation off, and I'm just going to put this back in place and just try to do this real quick while you guys are watching. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is take this off. Right, so this now goes back to being in the right scale, right? And now what I would also notice here is that there's a couple of position keyframes for this layer. So let's check those out. Let's see. Let's going to use these buttons here to jump to my first keyframe here, and that is 970 by 447. And if we click off of this and get in a little closer, we can see that that issue of it having raised up is not happening on this keyframe. It has a slightly different issue, which is that there's a gap between the two layers, which you can kind of see right there, which shouldn't be there. But I think this keyframe's closer because we don't have to move it up and down, right? So if I zoom back here and go back to this keyframe now, it's like this, you'll see now we're up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that keyframe, so we don't need it. Okay, I'm going to delete it, and that puts it back there. And it actually looks like that gap problem has been solved too, so that's good. Maybe it's still at the beginning, that gap though. So I think what this means is that this layer probably just needs to be nudged over. I'm just going to use my arrow key and like nudge it over one pixel that way. Looks like I might need another pixel or two, so I'm going to move 2 more pixels. That does it. Okay. Now you see, because there was a keyframe there for position, I actually made another position keyframe here. So what I'm going to do first is delete the old one. Okay. And now delete this one so that it's definitely like lined up again. Okay. So now that we got that done, now that does that, and now this comes over here. Okay, and right there it clicks down, and that's where the arrow, I keep calling that a mouse, that's where the position animation happens. So let's look at that. I pressed P to reveal the position, and now what I can do is click here to put a position keyframe also for the work area, and I'm going to delete this other scale keyframe because there's no point in keeping like spare keyframes that don't do any animation on a layer. Just get rid of them. So now I'm going to move. This is going to be a little tricky because I'd rather because this is the last action of the arrow, and actually this person doesn't have the arrow go off screen. It's a little bit lucky. So what I could do is kind of just delete this keyframe here, and now I can move both of these at the same time. And let's see, is there a guide in here? Yep. This person made a guide, so now let's move this over and I'm going to now use my arrow keys and click that in there, right? And I think now that it doesn't distort the art, right? I'm going to turn those off, and it's like lined back up again. So, that's how I do that. And what we can do is Shift Option Command B, or Option Command B rather, forgetting my own keyboard shortcuts, and look at this now. Okay, cool. So at least we fixed that problem. Now, I think that the timings here are a little bit, there's some slow and then fast or whatever, so we can kind of like look at this too. I think I noticed some right at the beginning as well, and I kind of want to point this out. So, all right, great. I pressed U to show all of the animated properties for this first arrow. And here, I'm going to Option Command B, and let's just look at this shot for one sec. Okay. So, again, this is really good. The animation here is really good, and I'm not trying to knock it at all. But what I notice is, if we look at all these keyframes in greater detail, we'll see that there's some unnecessary keyframes in here, okay? So for one, if I select this, obviously you could see the path. And if you can't see the path, by the way, there's this tricky thing. If you go up here to this little 3-line menu next to composition and click on View Options, ... it'll open up another window, okay? And sometimes this gets turned off, the layer controls, and then if I hit OK, you can't see the path, which could be another one of those like scary, like why am I not seeing my path kind of moments. So if that ever happens to you, click, just make sure to go up here and go to View Options and turn Layer Controls back on. There's some like keyboard shortcut that I always hit that accidentally turns that off. Hopefully not for you. In any case, back to this wonderful project. So here we go. This movement here for the arrow, it's kind of funny. It's like it comes in a straight line and then it stops and moves in a different straight line, and that's a little bit robotic. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and delete this keyframe, right? And now this just moves in a straight line like that over there, and then we could always add some like curves on there or whatever. But I don't think you need that extra keyframe there. I'm going to undo that, and here, just watch what that does. It kind of puts like a funny bend and a speed change in there. So I think a general rule of thumb for any animation ever in After Effects is this. The fewer the keyframes that you can get away with using to make the animation that you want, the better. Okay? The fewer the keyframes generally means the more elegant the animation. Okay? Now, there are some keyframes that you absolutely need that you can't get rid of, but just keep that in mind. If you have extra keyframes, they're often not necessary. Okay? Like, for example, here, this is another good example. There's a bunch of scale keyframes here. And when I first looked at this, I thought that this person was doing some kind of subtle animation in here. But actually, look, this scale keyframe is 100, okay? And then if I go to the next one, it's also 100, so there's been no change there. And then we have one frame later, another keyframe that's also at 100, okay? And then finally, we have another keyframe a few frames later that's also at 100. And this is the start of the animation here, okay? This is where it starts happening. So you just don't need all these 100 keyframes, right? Now again, it's very easy to put those in by accident. I totally understand, and I totally did the same thing when I started out too, and I'm not knocking anybody here. These mistakes are supernatural, and this is great, so again. Now let's look at this. Right here we have basically one frame, okay? I mean, not just basically, we have one frame. And this animation, to get bigger, is happening over one frame. And it's you almost never want something to happen over one frame unless it's a hold keyframe, because it makes it just a really jarring, there's no real animation. It just flips from one state to the other, essentially, over one frame. And the other thing is that this got scaled up to 157, which seems really big to me. You know, that would be like, if I was like pressing a button here with my finger, if I went like, whoa, before pressing it or whatever, I think you just want like a little click. Like, I would take this down to something smaller, like 110, okay? Just so it's not like, you know, a sledgehammer. And the other thing is, like, for this move up, we definitely want a few frames, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something, maybe 4 frames, okay? And then, you know, we're kind of missing one of the steps of this here. So the way this works again with the three-part action is first you anticipate, then you act, and then you react, okay? Right now, here we have the anticipation, but not the action in a way, or not the reaction. So what I would do is go like a couple frames from here and now make this, I gotta just push this down, make this now like 90, okay? So just a little bit smaller. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, sorry for the sirens. And then this comes back up and goes back to 100 there, right? And the arrow doesn't, I don't think we need this position keyframe here. I'm not sure what this is doing. Oh, okay. So it's kind of, oh, it's just starting to move over. Okay, so I'm just going to push that back here. And, oh, I see in the CTI, I need to push that back here too. And in fact, this is one of the real big issues, I think, with a lot of the animations that I saw, is that people didn't put necessarily enough of a pause in between actions. And what that can do is it can make the actions kind of hard to see. And I'll go over this a little bit more, but what I would do here is definitely take these keyframes, and maybe all this too, I'm not quite sure what that is, and certainly push these down a little bit, and then make this so that this action happens after a few frames after this pause here. And let's just look at that to see what difference that made. Right? It just means that you can kind of like see the action a little bit clearer because it pauses. All right? If it clicks and then everything's happening all at the same time, it just makes a very confusing animation where everything seems to kind of run together. All right? You know, other than this here, I think this is a really good job, so I'm going to move on to the next one. But really good job. Okay, cool. So this student's had a couple similar problems. I just wanted to point this out again, but let's look at this animation. And I thought, like, for the most part, all the timings and the animation here is pretty good, okay? But we're just having a couple of the same problems that we had in the last one, and I just really want to go over this again. In fact, pretty much mostly the same problems. So, again, here, as you can tell, this background layer is shifted way out. Oh, and look, this thing's happening that I was talking about. Cool. So I select a layer, right, and I do not see a bounding box around it, or if I select my arrow, I do not see the path, okay? So definitely make sure to go up here and go to View Options and click on Layer Controls, if that ever happens, right? Cool. So back to this. Now, if I'm just going to do the same thing here with this one. And just this, again, this is so easy for this to happen that I've done this a million times, okay? So just, again, press P and go to 960 by 540. Okay, and the tab key, by the way, if you're in here, it will click you to the next one, right? Tab goes back and forth. So that's kind of cool. So, and then just lock that, okay? Just make sure that that's locked off. And I'm going to do my guides. And, you know, the same thing is happening here where this person used a scale animation again to make this get smaller. I don't think I need to go over this again about why that's not good, just because it compresses the art. And, you know, so I think you guys get that from the last time, but just make sure, again, it's really important not to change the art that your client gives you, or heaven forbid that you accidentally change their logo or something that's very recognizable to people, you know, like the art director, like a logo, for example, or type. If you kind of like mess up the sizes of the logo, they will notice that in 1 second because they've seen it so many times, okay? So just be really, really careful with that. Yeah, I think this here, this button, we could go over this again because I think, you know, this definitely, I think could have just a little bit more jazz to it. Whoa. That's my audio playing a little slow, I think. That's funny. The arcs here, by the way, look really good. I think there's one here as well. I'm kind of jumping around here. That this arc here, I think, is a little bit funky. It gets pulled down a little bit far, so I would be careful with that. And looking at some of these arc paths, I think you could see it. I think what I would probably would have done here is more had this kind of pull. Oops, not that. This part of it. Nope, not that. Where's the handle I'm looking for? Let's see. Okay, so there's this one, and I think. Okay, I see. This keyframe here is unnecessary, right? We don't need, I totally get what you're trying to do here, and I see this now. Okay, so I'm going to delete this keyframe because this is just supposed to be a point along the curve. So I'm going to delete that, and now I'm going to click on this with my Convert Bezier tool, which is this one up here, okay? And, did I do that right? Select this arrow, and I'm going to click on that, right? Now I get a Bezier handle. And now what you can do is, you can now make that curve just with these two, okay? I'm going to click on that one as well. And what I think would be better, and one of the things that I try to think about with these Beziers a little bit when it comes to position, is having things kind of move smoothly between 2 points. So like this is going to kind of come down and move this way, right? So this little curve here should kind of lead it along that path. And this here, I kind of try to think about this as like, you know, this Bezier should be along its own path for the most part, because that's sort of the way this is moving at the start. So I try to like balance those two things. So it's kind of like moving along its own Bezier at the start, and then it's going to curve smoothly onto the path that it's already kind of wants to go into. So let's check that out. Let me back up a little bit here. Okay, well, I'm previewing the whole thing, but there you go, right? So it's just like a little bit of a smoother movement, I think, there, right? And I could change the timings here. I think maybe it's a little bit slow, so I'd probably pull that up or whatever. But just so you know, so it can get very confusing with those Bezier paths. And that's another thing, like the fewer points you can have along a Bezier path, the more elegant your animation will be, and the more control I believe that you'll have over it once you start to get used to those Bezier curves, which are a little bit funky for sure. So I was going to talk about this button press here at the end, and then I will move on. So I just feel like, in a situation like this, whoops, wrong. In a situation like this, where you have a button press, and it's kind of like an important action to see, I feel like here it gets just glossed over a little bit, and I think we can make it a little bit more deliberate and just have the audience see this a little bit better, right? So again, part of that is this sort of the click here, and I think that, again, the three-part action we're kind of missing one of the parts of here. And that's definitely confusing in advance, so don't sweat it again. Let's jump in here. So I'm going to go, this is 1, 2 keyframes to get bigger, which again, I think that's a little slow, so I'm going to back this. Let's see, can I do it this way? Okay, first it lands, so I'm going to have it, let's see, what's this? Okay, I don't think I need this keyframe, right? So it lands, right? And then it's going to get bigger over like 4 or 5 frames. 1, 2, 3, 4 maybe. Okay. And then it's going to go 1, 2, and click down to 90. And this is the part that we've forgotten about here, okay, is the actual click. It's kind of the most important part. And this is the action. And now I'm going to go like another 4 or 5 frames, and then I can go back to 100. Okay. And I need to change the timings of when this changes as well, so that here we go. It's up, and then it clicks down, and then I like to go one more frame here, and I'm going to option bracket, cut that there, go page up 1, and now option and right bracket, extend that to there. Okay, and let's look at this. So there's no animation on this layer, and I think it would be kind of nice, like I did in the lecture, if I'm going to press S to reveal my scale, and let's see, I'm going to go to this keyframe to line up with this, and I'm going to make a scale keyframe, and then I'm going to press I to go back to the end point or beginning of this, and I'll make this like 90. Okay, let's check that out at real size. Yeah, I just think that's a little bit more deliberate, and it's just a little easier to see all of the action. So that's probably how I would do that. Okay, but really great job with this. I think overall this one is really good, and just a couple small things, right? So let's move on to the final one we're going to talk about, and let's look at this. Okay, cool. So this is really well done, and all of the steps, this person took all the right steps, and all the animation is really good. I just think it's all about the timings here. I noticed that the timings are very inconsistent in this one. There's a couple of, at least one awkward pause here at the end where, like, literally nothing's happening, so there's about 9 seconds here for almost a whole second. And that's kind of a motion graphics no-no a little bit. I mean, I'm going to say as a rule of thumb, something should probably always be moving on the screen unless you're very, very, very deliberately stopping all motion as a way of kind of drawing attention to that. But almost always something should kind of keep moving. I mean, this is motion graphics, right? So let's walk through this. And again, I think this is a really good job. All the pieces are in the right place, but I just want to start changing the timings here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is select all of these. And okay, so that's locked, great. And I'll just press U to reveal all the keyframes here. And let's just look at this. Okay, cool. So great. So the main thing that I notice is it's way too slow at the start here, and then this is really fast in comparison. The thing that, like, I think the thing that I think works the least good, I don't know if that's grammatically correct, are these kind of buttons here. And it's not because the animation's bad, it's just that there's no pauses there, all right? So let's talk about these pauses again. So like even here, when this comes in, it should land, I mean, it should definitely be quicker, but then it should land and pause. I kind of talked about this in the lecture, but when things, it's like change direction really suddenly, it just doesn't really look like a human did it, because that's not the way we move. And also, it's not the clearest form of communication for the viewer, because you're asking us to look at sort of two things almost happening at the same time. And that's a little bit harder for our eyes to be able to see, right? So if it comes in and it pauses, even just a little bit, it sort of resets our brain. And we're like, okay, that action's over and the next action is starting. You'll see what I mean in one sec. So if I have this come over and land, just say, like on frame 15 here, okay, and then pause 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames, something like that, right? And then I'm going to zoom in here a little bit, and I just use my roller mouse. So now let's take this scale animation that's happening here on this arrow, and so take this and we're going to move it over. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so first thing that we have to do is the mouse is kind of moving, right? Because there's no pause, right? So what I have to do is build this pause in. So I need a keyframe that's exactly the same as this, right? Copy and paste it somewhere here, and I'm going to need to kind of shove all these down for 1 sec, right? I just need this to pause while I work on this animation, okay? And then I will also move the CTI animation down there. I'm going to make this look worse before I make it look better, okay? So that comes in now, and now there's a pause, good. And it goes from 100, and let's build this 3-part action here, okay? Because I do think this makes this clearer in this. So in this case, so 1, 2, 3, 4 frames, and let's go up to 110, okay? And let's go 2 frames and go down, and I'll just move this 90 keyframe down 2 frames, right? Because you built this great, all the right keyframes here, and then this is the 100 again, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? Something like that. So there's our little sequence now. And now what we can do is go that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames or whatever, and now we can put our, the pause keyframe here, and we can now put these keyframes here, and let's figure out what's going on with this arrow now. Okay, so all I need to do now is just move this over, and that should be good, right? Yeah, so let's look at that. Okay, right. So at least now, and let's actually have this, come in from over here. Oopsies, wrong tool, V arrow. Let's have it move all the way diagonally across the screen so that we really see it. Or maybe that's a little too fast here for these timings, so we can have it move up from like here, and I'll undo this a little bit. Right? So it's a lot clearer right now because the actions are broken up into little chunks, right? So our brain can kind of like process them a little bit better, right? So kind of that, all right? And now let's see. So now it moves down here, okay? And we've got a pretty good pause. So we've got the pause keyframe. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? And put this. And let's see now. Let's take this sequence and now see what this person's done here. So this keyframe is a copy of this one. Great, so it's our pause, and now it goes over here, and there's a nice arc to this too, I think. No, but that's cool. Okay, and then we just have this same issue again, where it moves over, but it doesn't pause before starting the next action. Okay, so let's take all of these keyframes and just shove them down here for a sec. Doesn't matter where, and I'm going to go. Let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and I'm going to copy and paste this keyframe, which is this arrow just sitting there. This is the pause, right? And now I can kind of like move these things back, I believe. Although it comes over and pauses, right? Now this is it moving down, actually. So let me. Comes over and pauses. Okay, so but I need another pause here too. So I prematurely move these over. Okay, so this is my coming over and pause. Okay, I just need to extend this, right? And now it looks like the action here is, let's see, we got some scale action here that goes from 90 to, I see, okay, so here's an issue, is that the last scale keyframe that we had is 100, and that the first one coming up here is 90, and then it gets like bigger. So this is kind of like a little bit backwards. So what we need to do is we need to copy this 100 value, or we can just change it right here and paste it, right? We just need to make this 100 so that in between this keyframe and this keyframe, while the arrow is moving over, it's not going from 100% to 90%, okay? So now it's at 100 again during the pause, and we can basically really just copy and paste this action right here again. I'm even just delete this and paste, and I was on that 100 keyframe. So now this is still 100, so it doesn't get smaller, like I was just saying. Now it does that, right? Let's look at that. Oh, whoops, need to widen out my work area. How funny. Comes in, click, move, down, click, right? And you can see all the pauses are definitely working a lot better, and this pause can actually be bigger. And so now here, this person's done an interesting thing. Rather than just trimming the layer so that it starts right here, this person did, which is great, they tried to figure out a different way to do it. Maybe they weren't sure how to trim a layer. So what they did was that they used a little opacity information to bring this stopwatch on. And that's cool. You can totally do that. I'm going to show you just a couple more methods here, right? For one, if you like that animation, the way that I would do it, rather than having, interpolation, which means that like it goes from like 100 to 0, but it stops at like 50 on the way, and if I were to make this longer, the quote-unquote interpolation here would be more keyframes because I've spaced it out, right? So instead of that, instead of having interpolation in there, we could just use a hold keyframe here, which I don't think we've talked about yet. But if I select both of these keyframes, a hold keyframe, by the way, just means that it holds the value that you set it at until it encounters another keyframe, and then it changes all at once with no interpolation. Okay, again, we'll talk about this more. It's a little advanced. But if you right-click on these selected keyframes and go to toggle hold keyframe, toggle just means turn on and off like a light switch, okay? So now these are hold keyframes. And now what this means is I could set this, so that on the click, if I want this to turn off right here, this layer, and I don't want to trim it for whatever reason, I can now take these keyframes and put it here. And this is my 0 hold keyframe, so it's 100. And then it holds that value until it hits here, and then it turns the layer off. Well, that's easier to see like that, all at once, okay, all at one go. And it doesn't matter where I put this keyframe, because it'll just hold this value until it hits that frame, and then it'll turn that off, right? And let's see if we can get this click right there. Yeah, I think that's a good spot for it. Now, you also would have to do the reverse here with the blue one that comes on. We would take these both, and another shortcut for that is Option-Command-Click on these, and that turns them into hold keyframes or into regular linear keyframes back and forth. Oops, don't want to do that. Just click on this, right? Now, if I take this and I line this second keyframe up with that, now the change will happen all at once, right? Like, here, let me show you. Go back up, beginning and end of my work area, and it looks like this. Click. See that? Click. So that's a different way to do that. I should just show you, you don't actually have to put an animation in there at all. You could go to this spot where the click happens and back up one frame toward the beginning of the comp and click and drag this to trim that there, right? There on that frame. And then go one more frame and then this, and you can click and drag or option and left bracket, trim that right there. And we'll talk about that more. But now, if I take out the hold keyframe action, so I take this one out and this one out, now it just is like this, right? It's the same exact thing, but the good thing about this, the advantage there, is that you get a layer and it's done. Like, it's off screen now, so you have less layers on screen. But the thing with the hold keyframes and the opacity, that could be useful if this was going to be turned on and off a whole bunch of times, and you didn't want to make like new layers every time, but you just wanted to kind of like animate the opacity to turn on or off for this, okay? So a good way to look out to try to do something that you weren't sure how to do, okay? So that's really good, and that's a couple methods for dealing with that. Because, I'm going to say that, fading on, though, it was a great thing to try to do. Fading things on and off screen is often, it's more noticeable than you might think, and it's kind of like a cheat a little bit, okay? So that's what I would say about that. The other thing about this here is the way that the CTI lines up with this keyframe, because I'm OCD, like I said, this sort of bugs me. So this is actually cool. Since this is a moving element, I kind of want to show you how to adjust this, right? So what I'm going to say is, let's first drop a guide of where we want this to be. Okay, so I'm going to press Command R to show my rulers, and now I'm going to drop the guide here, right, and try to make that pretty accurate. And you can zoom in on this to make sure it's pretty accurate. Looks good. Okay, so now, this is an animated thing already, this CTI, so we have to be a little bit careful here, because if I change, for example, this here, you know, or is it this here, when this lands, if I just take this and move, not the arrow, but the CTI, and actually we might want to do this with both the arrow and the CTI. Yeah, this is going to be slightly tricky here, because it involves the arrow, which is going to move it around a bunch, okay? And so what we really want to do is, this keyframe here for the CTI needs to be shoved over, right? But since it's kind of connected to the arrow here, this keyframe's not in the right place either, technically, nor is the pause keyframe anymore, okay? So I need to highlight all three of those and move the path for all of them at the same time. And all I'm going to do is kind of slide this over so that now this lines up with my guide here. You can kind of use the arrows too to click it right in place. And because these were all selected, I have not messed up any of the incoming or outgoing animation for this. So let's check this out. Right? So it just moves the whole thing over. Now I've got something else messed up here, but right? So whenever you want to move up a part of the path that's already animated, you have to be really careful and get in and select the keyframes that you want to move all together, and then make sure you're actually on one of those keyframes, because if I was here and I tried to move this, obviously I'd make another set of keyframes there, which would be no good, right? Cool. So that's how I do that, and let's see, now we click, and when this goes on at the end point here, that's when we want the keyframe to turn on. So here's this keyframe. Okay, so what I would do is just lose this 0 opacity, and then I'll lose the 100, because there's no point in having a keyframe in there if you don't want it. And then I'm going to just zoom back and grab this, not move it, but trim it so that that starts there too. So now both of those click on at the same time, like that. Right? Okay, great. And now this pause here now looks good. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames or so, and that's fine. And now this is going to move down, and what we needed to do is, oh, I see, so there's no actual click here at all. It's just sort of like turns on as this moves over, and that's, you know, that's fine, but I think we want the viewer to feel every click here, right? We want them to see, we want them to get into the head, kind of the person moving the arrow. We want them to feel like that makes sense, or it's doing something deliberate. So I feel like here it's just kind of sliding over and it's changing. It sort of doesn't really emphasize this, and you know, why not? Let's emphasize this. So let's give this a shot. So it comes in and it moves down, and what I wanted to do is let's move a little quicker than this. Okay, something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 frames or something, because it's not a lot of distance between these two, right? And it moves down. And then it's going to pause, okay? And we can just copy and paste the scale animation here again, copy and paste a few frames down, right? So now it clicks, and right here I'm going to go to, this is my click down, I'm going to go one more frame down, and I'm going to, okay, so it's this one, this is my keyframe, and here's my button here. And what I'm going to do actually, just to make this a little easier, is I'm going to pull this down so that these two are together. And you could even like color these two, whatever, just for the sake of it. Okay, and now this animation, we don't actually need this to have an animation here, so I'm going to delete the 0 and the 0, and then I'm going to delete the hundreds of the keyframes, the 100 scale keyframes. And the reason I did that, by the way, I should explain this. If I'm here, okay, if I'm on the 0 side of these keyframes and I delete both of these, I will have left this at 0, which I don't want. Now I'll have to adjust that back up again. So if I'm at the 100 side of this and I select these and I delete that, now I've left this at 100, believe it or not, and that's what I want. What I did was, like, I'm very careful about this, so I first selected the 0 keyframes and deleted those. So even if I was here and I deleted just the 0 keyframes now this is 100 up there, and now I could delete these and make sure that it's always at 100. You could do it anyway, right? So, okay, so this is going to move down, and it's going to click, and right here, one frame after, I'm going to have both of these start. So I'm just going to zoom back, and I'm going to grab it, and click, that right there. And let's go to the out point of that, and press N, and let's preview this. Oh, and let me back up. Sorry. whoopsies, I forgot something really important, which is that the button turns off here, which is kind of hilarious. So let me press, these are selected, so let me press I, and I'll go back one page, and I'll select this, and then I will doink, trim that there, and now that should be better. Click, click. Whoa, that is not better. What did I do? What did I do? Oh, I see. I completely messed that up. Totally, completely messed that up. I found the wrong layer. Wow, this is like watching your teacher make mistakes here. Okay, and so what I need this to do is this layer, not that. Duh. And this still actually has that animation in there too, so I will take that out and take that out, and I will trim this, go back one frame and trim this here. And now that should do that. Okay. Oh, except I set this to 0. Ah, okay, put that back to 100. Wow. All right. I am not on my game today. Cool. Great. So, like, just even for this one thing, you can see that this is like a lot clearer. Let me go back to the beginning now and we'll watch this whole opening shot. So the timings are better. I adjusted these, and the pauses are way better. And I fixed a couple of just like technical things for this to turn on and off. Now you'll notice that oh, and I need to move it off. So, okay, great. So this is perfect. So I will copy this keyframe, copy and paste, right, to keep that value the same. That's essentially my pause. And now I will go 10 frames to the end, or go to my out point, however many frames that was. It happened to be 10. And now I can just move my arrow. Whoops. I could just use the values to move my arrow off and kind of put it at an angle or something like that, right? Cool. Click. Boop. Blink. Blink. Right? So, you know, this process is just about coming up with really clear actions. And I think the more that things can move in and pause just for a little and then click and move off in like discrete little chunks, I think that really helps the viewer's eye see all the actions, okay? So, I don't know if I need to go through the rest of these, but I do want to point out a couple little other issues that this person had. One of them definitely being this moment here. And this is really easy to do. And let's see what happens here. We have our arrow, and I'm going to press U. And then we have this, I guess it's the keyframe 2. Okay, and I'm going to press this. All right, so what happened here is, let's just roll through this frame at a time. So the arrow's moving over, and then it gets there. Okay, yeah, we just don't have a pause here again. Okay, so let's back this. So this is moving in. Boop. And, okay, yeah. So let's go 1, 2, 3 frames and copy and paste this, right? And now I've built that little pause in, right? And now we can start this here. And let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so right away I fixed that little issue, okay? But it still looks a bit slow, so what I would do is take all these keyframes and push this up toward the start. Yep, so now you can see that that's like a little bit easier to see, and then, maybe not. It kind of goes off, actually. I take that all back. So here's the mouse. The way the edge of the mouse is kind of clicking right there. And then when we go here, it's slid off. Okay, so they've moved a different number of pixels. So I need to fix this. And also, remember that this keyframe here is the pause. So I need to fix both of these at the same time, so there's no shift. And I need to be on one of these keyframes to do this. Okay, and what I'm going to do is just move this over, and I'm holding down shift. And I'm going to try to remember where it was before. And we can always double check this. It looks like I need to move over couple more clicks, but that should probably do it. Yep. Okay. And let me zoom back so you can actually see that. Right. So now it just seems a little more consistent. The second one's really good, so I think the error only happened on the first one. So I think actually the rest of this shot is pretty close. It looks actually like something happened kind of there too. Oh, I see. I think it's because actually of the curve here. Let's see. So that's the work area, sorry, work area left U. Okay. I see. It just doesn't have a pause, just like the last one, so it just looks like it gets off track right away. So I don't think I need to go over that again. Other than that, it's looking really good. Yeah, I think this animation's fine. Other than that, just like, you know, the pauses mostly, you know, like for example on this button press, let's look at this. Yeah, it's sort of just like, it like it kind of like comes over and just clicks right away, even actually technically before it stops moving. So we definitely want to push this back and just make sure that it like comes to a rest first before it clicks, right? And in this case, we'd also, I guess, have to trim this back like that or something. And again, this three-part action, it needs to get bigger first and then smaller. And the timings here are really quick. So let's just roll over this one more time. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or just 4, for example. And we can take all these and move them down and move them one more down. So let's make this 110, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and it gets bigger. And then 1, 2, it snaps down to 90. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever, it snaps back up to 100, right? And what I like to do is put the button press right here. Okay, click. And we could even have that button react like we did on the last one and get like bigger again. And then we just need to change the progress bar here, animation to start. Oh, that was the progress bar. Whoops, not the button. I trimmed the wrong layer. So instructive, so instructive. So it's actually, this needs to start right there. This one, okay. And oh, it looks like, oh, okay, so this person also faded out that button there. So I'm going to take that out, and so that's 100% again, and now that I'm one frame before where the blue one comes on, here, right, one frame back, I can now walk this back and trim this layer here and click it into place. So it changes, right? Click, right? And that's a little bit easier to see, and like I said before, we could do that thing where we make a scale keyframe here at 100 and now go back there to the start of this and make this like 90 or whatever, right? And that's good, right? So that looks like that. Yeah, just a little bit easier to see the click. And that's what it's all about, is making it kind of just easy for the audience, okay? Because if they miss that step of the button press, they don't know what's going on. And that really is your job, to walk them through all those steps of the action, okay? So great job to all three of these people. I don't want to single them out. Everybody did a good job. I want to talk about, just as a bonus here, I want to talk about two other methods that we haven't talked about at all for doing this render bar, okay? Because a couple people weren't sure how to do this. And again, I just dreamt up what I thought was like kind of the simplest way to go, which was to do this scale move. But there are some more advanced things here. What I'm going to do is select the render bar here, and I'm going to just drop this back to 100 and 100. And that made a keyframe there because it was already animated. I'm going to delete the other keyframes, then delete that. So now it's at 100, 100. And I just want to show two other methods for how to do this animation, because there's a lot of redundancy in After Effects, just like Photoshop or whatever. There's multiple ways you could do something. So if you're still watching this lecture or this animation oatmeal, at this point, I'm going to show you some new tips that maybe other people who stopped watching this a little bit earlier are not going to get. Okay, so cool. So first thing I want to talk about is masking, which is really important, and we're going to get to it for sure later on. But if I select my layer, okay, and I click on my rectangle tool, now with this selected, I can make a mask on this. And check this out. So I'm going to just kind of click, oops. Because, actually I lied, because this is a shape layer, I need to actually press this button, because this rectangle tool, the shape tool, it has two functions. It makes shapes, obviously, but it also makes masks, and you can make a shape first and then mask the shape, but it's slightly confusing. You have to press this button to be making a mask, and this button you're making a shape, and this button you're making a mask. Okay, so I just did that wrong, so that was very instructive, but now with this layer selected and that button pressed, and my rectangle, I can now make a mask. And you'll be able to see this as I move the edge of the mask. You can kind of imagine how this can animate, right? So I could make a mask like this, okay, which is not revealing that position bar at all, right? And let me go back to the beginning by pressing I. And now you can see it opened my mask menu, but if it didn't, you can always press M to reveal the mask. And then inside here, there's a bunch of cool options, and we'll talk about these later. But the one that you want to know about now is mask path. If I click that, that now means I've set a keyframe for this mask like here, right? Which is actually not revealing any of that layer yet, okay? But if I move like 1, 2, 3 or whatever frames down, Now what I can do is click on my mask. All right, now that's selected all of the parts of the mask, which I don't want. What I'm going to do is shift and deselect one of the points, okay? And then I could select this and select this by hitting shift. And now I can make this animate this way by dragging that mask across. And you see it's created another animation keyframe, one for this shape, and now if I go back to the beginning, one for that shape. So now it animates like this. Click, right? So it's a totally, it looks like the timings are off on that, but that's a totally different way that you could have done the exact same thing, right? And you could have even built, for those who built like stutters in there, you could have done it that way too, all right? So that's masking, and we'll get to masking, I think, in week 3 or 4. Or no, sorry, like project 3, I think, in week 2. So there's that. Now I want to show you an even different method that's also kind of cool, which would also involve a mask. So I'm going to delete this mask actually, which deletes my keyframes. So now I just have this full thing. So I want to use position for this animation. In other words, another thing that you could have done with this progress bar is just kind of like moved it like that into place, right? But because it's on top of the background and this little like, you know, gray area here, this is just part of the background that it's just coming on top of. But what we could do, if you want to get a little bit tricky about this, is make a new solid, Command Y, and make this exactly the same color as this, right, part. And now you could kind of like just grab this and shrink this down. I'm just sort of moving, I'm just basically scaling it, unchained scale by grabbing it from the top. And I just want to like move this up here, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press T to reveal the opacity, and I'm going to lower this down to like 25% or something. And I can just see the bar underneath it here. And I'm going to pull this down a little bit more, just so it's a little more centered in that. And now I'm going to take my rectangle tool again, and now I'm on a solid, so I don't need to deal with that, pressing that button, because you can't make a shape on a solid, you can only make a mask on a solid, right? With this selected, I'm going to get in kind of close here, and I'm going to lean in close, and I'm just going to make this mask exactly the size of this rectangle here, and try to get it really precise, right? Okay, something like that, and if I didn't do it perfectly, then don't worry about it for this example. Now, masks in After Effects default to being add masks, aka whatever's inside the mask is added on screen. But we can check this and change this now so that whatever's inside the mask is actually subtracted from the screen. Okay, and that's what I'm going to do here. And so now what you can see is I have this solid that's sitting on top that is this big, and it's covering over part of the art, but then I'm masking it off to reveal that gray bar underneath again, okay? And I'm going to call this like my mask layer or whatever, and I'm going to drop this down now so that that is on top of the render bar. And I'm also going to trim this layer so it starts here, so that otherwise it's like going to be hanging out for my whole animation. So let me go here. And the trim shortcut, which we haven't gone over yet, is Option and left bracket, and that will trim it right to the CTI. Again, a tip for those of you who are still watching. And now, what I can do is, so now here's my render bar, and I'm going to turn this, actually my mask back up to 100. And here's my render, oh, sorry, that's my render blue. That's my button, so that's not what I want. What I want is my progress bar, so I'm confusing myself. So let me move this mask down on top of that, and now this isn't animated at all. Okay, so it's off. And what I want to do now is go 1, 2, 3, right? And now I'm going to make a position keyframe, and I think you all know that I do that by, yep, that's right, pressing that position stopwatch. Yeah. And now, because this is the final position I want this to land in, I made that keyframe first, and now I'm going to press I and go back to the beginning, because this is literally like underneath this solid layer now. I can just grab this and move it off, and you don't see it, right? So check that out now. That would look like this, right? 3 different ways for doing that, all of which are totally valid. Yeah. Both involve masks, which we haven't talked about. And masks are really important, and I wasn't quite sure exactly when to talk about masks in this, because it's a little advanced, so I'm glad I threw this in here now. All right, so that takes us to the end of our Animation Oatmeal segment for this week. And I just want to say thank you again. I'm totally impressed with everybody's work. You're all really crushing this, so thank you.